Okay, at this point, I'm going to change gears. We've gone through a bunch of different bikeway types. There are some other ones that weren't mentioned in this webinar. I'm glad to talk with anyone about any of the ones I've discussed or others. But we're going to move on to bike planning and implementation strategies. So again, the perspective here is from a local town that wants to create a bike plan and implement a bike plan and avoid some of those political pitfalls that can slow down progress or stop it altogether. In addition to the technical details of knowing what's the appropriate bikeway type, where is appropriate where, there's the issue of what are some strategies that you can use? What are some political factors that may come up? And it's to your advantage to be aware of some of those. So I'll try to cover some that I have witnessed over the years. The first one, having been a consultant for 20 different towns, I find in town after town that there's this latent interest by a good number of residents to come out and constructively contribute to the process of doing a bike plan. Many times elected officials are amazed at, wow, hey, there's 70 people that showed up to this meeting and they're not here to complain about something. So that does set an impression. So if you are going to be doing a bike plan in your town, if you're someone working with an agency, even if you're an advocate and you're looking for others, just be aware that there are many that are out there that are willing to contribute constructively. Florida Bicycle Association has its members list, and we'd be glad to try to come up with some others that might come out there, but involve residents who bike. They have a whole lot of knowledge about the local conditions in your town, where the needs are, what are the best ways through, and so on. So as staff members, it helps to really tap into that knowledge. Here's a tool for bike planning that is helpful that I find that more agencies are getting accustomed to, and that is the Strava bicycle heat map. So Strava is a phone app that people use to track their bike trips. Certainly not everybody, but a good number of cyclists have used this. And so now what you get is an aggregated total of all these bike trips that users of this app have used all the way around the world. So actually, when I travel different places, I will look at this to see where local cyclists will ride. There is an online version of this that you can use to see what are the popular routes in town. You want to make sure that those are included in your bike planning. The picture that I show here is an example of a busy north-south road for cars, but it's not used often by bikes. Bikes, however, are seen east to west on this in this graphic, except for taking a short jog on the busy road. So from looking at this Strava data and seeing that that segment of the busy road really needs to be more bike friendly, it helps to set priorities. If you have used this, or if you want to use this, as of about 4 months ago, I think it is, Strava has now made their data free of charge if you're a planner. So this is a great tool that can be used to show where there is demand. When designing for bike accommodations, it's good to plan for a target audience of casual adult cyclists. The club level, more traffic tolerant cyclist, yeah, they want to be able to get to places directly and quickly. You have to accommodate them, maybe not to as high of a level, since they are typically more tolerant than the average adult. On the other hand, you don't want to have your bike planning be strictly toward kids. In bike plans that I've done, when we have used on-road routes, we've made sure that it is on a roadway that has sidewalks alongside of it, because kids, especially younger kids, don't yet have the physical or mental capabilities for some of the on-road skills. So by having sidewalks be along those on-road bike routes, you are trying to serve all the different ranges, while at the same time not designing strictly for the child. When doing a bike plan, it's often good to look at a grid. How do you get from any point A to any point B throughout your town? Typically, you might want to designate a grid that is continuous with spacing of half a mile to a mile of routes that are designated in some way. What's the appropriate treatment for each of these segments? You have to take a look and study. That is what bike planning is about, figuring out for each of the corridors, what is the appropriate treatment where, what is its priority in the entire network for that community. And when coming up with the treatment, you should make sure that you specify enough details that the public works guy, the implementation staff know how to know what to do, instead of just put a line on a map. So when adding bike routes in your town, it's important to try to find ways that infrastructure investment by the community will benefit more than just cyclists. In that way, you can get more political support. For example, the adding of the stripes on the wide residential roads can slow down traffic along a road where people are very concerned about speeding. Maybe if you feel that a bike plan alone might not have enough political support in your community, maybe it becomes a bike and pedestrian or an active transportation plan, and that becomes your plan scope. So by doing so, you'll appeal to a much wider range of people in your community. The elected officials will see that, and that might be what you need to get the support for the bike ped plan. Watch out for those political landmines that often can stop your bike planning efforts in your community. And these are some of them that I've seen over the years that have been the most common. First one is removal of parking, especially by businesses, even on some of the quiet residential streets. If there is the political will to do this, if you feel like there's not going to be enough opposition, then certainly it should be considered. But you should find out beforehand. You should talk with the residents, you should talk with the businesses, and find out if there is going to be opposition to removal of parking. If there is, then you might not be able to remove that parking. You might have to come up with a backup bikeway accommodation. One thing I mentioned before is widening sidewalks along residential streets. So as it turns out, some of those residential streets are very good locations for on-road bikeways anyway, and the need to widen the sidewalk to a side path width may not be that great. Certainly it is an issue that is going to bring opposition. One of the towns I worked in, the town was going to widen the sidewalk to make it 10 feet for a bike trail. And they had 100 people come out who lived along that roadway who were upset at the city council for it. The city council backed down and said, okay, we won't do it. And instead, we're going to stripe the roadways. When they did that, it was much more supported. And then finally, another political landmine is retrofitting off-road trails near homes. Interestingly, many new home subdivisions will advertise that they have trails. But if you try to retrofit trails around a subdivision, people come out. So as I mentioned earlier, make sure to arm yourself with the facts so that you can handle those common fears that will come up. If a town is going to invest in bikeway infrastructure, it's important to also look at the other E's. And by that, you have education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation. And if you involve bicyclists in your bike planning process, this is where the residents can help. The cyclists who step forward to help with the process, they might be the ones who are in charge of bringing some of the educational resources to that community, bicyclist and motorist education. They might be the ones that are involved with the encouragement events, bike week, bike month, and so on. So by deputizing them, by working with them as city officials, you can leverage that staff time investment that your city is making. So the resources are out there to do those other E's, to do more than just engineering, to do the non-infrastructure things. And it's just a matter of identifying them and bringing them to your town. Building implementation momentum with low-hanging fruit. What I mean by this is many times when a town implements a bike plan at the very start, there may not be a lot of political support yet. So a good strategy is to start off with a project that was very popular during the bike plan process. That might not cost that much. Put in a couple of those easy projects first, and that could gain support for a larger budget in the next years. If you are going to seek a grant for projects, I would suggest that you reserve the grant applications for the tougher and larger projects to do. If it's something that's fairly cheap, such as striping a road, adding signs, putting in sharrows, it might be better just to go through that locally instead of seeking grants, because grants will have a lot of overhead. And then finally in this section, avoid creating a plan that gathers dust on a shelf. Way too many bike plans have been done where they're never looked at again. A town will feel good about themselves by creating a bike plan, but then not implement it. So what I would suggest as an advocate or as someone who's an agency person is make sure there's some accountability built in, that you have someone on staff, probably a planner, maybe a public works person, who a portion of their job, one of their responsibilities is to be in charge of implementation of the bike plan. That might involve mainstreaming the plan with other staff so they know to look at it when they're going to do their regular work. It may involve training. It may involve deputizing a bike advisory committee. And it may involve a long-term goal, such as bicycle-friendly community designation. Either way, if you have someone who's accountable to updates of the plan, progress of the plan, reporting that out, it does tend to result in better implementation. All right, a couple more slides on funding strategies before we move on to the Bike Infrastructure Assistance Program. Opportunistic is really the key for implementing bikeways. If you try to go out there and do a bike lane project just on its own, not as part of a resurfacing, it will probably cost more. If you try to install a side path or build a trail when it's not part of a road reconstruction, it'll probably cost more. So look for those opportunities where you can tie in bikeway improvements with other things already going on in your community. You can do that in a couple of ways. One is by editing your development ordinance. When a developer comes in, if you have a good ordinance, then they might be installing and building these bikeway accommodations just on their own dollar. Another way is a complete streets policy. If your town adopts a complete streets policy, if that's done by your elected officials, and then if your public works staff then incorporate roadway design standards, then that becomes a routine part of doing business in your community. And when there's a major development coming in, or when the town is going to be doing a major road project, it becomes normal to add bikeway accommodations. And then when you do have a major development, have someone take a look at it from a perspective of bicycling and walking. Different funding possibilities. Again, I talked about the municipal budget. The capital improvement program is a great place for some of those smaller projects that don't really cost that much. That's really not worth going for a grant. Developer requirements we talked about, and then the outside grant sources. These tend to be pretty competitive. If it's federal money, it does require a lot of complexity. There's a lot of approvals that have to be done. It usually adds years to a project and cost as well. So try to reserve the grant applications for the larger scale projects that are okay with tougher design requirements.